This is the video for January the 5th, 2021 for World History. We are going to begin looking at several revolutions. We're going to start with the British Revolution, then we're going to end with the American Revolution, and then have some type of a quiz. I'm assuming that'll be sometime next week. Then we'll do the French Revolution and the rise and fall of Napoleon. And that'll take us pretty far into January. And then we'll have a quiz then. Now, it's important that you have signed into Google Classroom. So if you're not sure your Google Classroom code, look at the email that I sent out on Sunday. Now, we begin today with the year 1603. 1603 was when Elizabeth I, a Tudor, died. Now, Elizabeth I was the last of the Tudor family. She had no heirs. And so the belief was that we need a new ruling monarch. Now, it was important in those days that a monarch be chosen, that no country could exist being ruled simply by commoners, as they're called, in England. And so the English Parliament is going to turn to the Stuarts of Scotland. Now, the Stuarts were very distant cousins of the Tudors, and James I is going to leave from Scotland, and he's going to come to England to rule over England, Scotland, Wales, and Ireland. Now, there was a great deal of disagreement amongst the commoners. This is a picture of Guy Fawkes. Now, Guy Fawkes is going to lead what is called the Gunpowder Revolution that was supposed to take place on November the 6th, 1607. Fawkes had taken a large amount of gunpowder and placed it in the basement of Parliament. And on November the 6th, 1607, King James I was to address all of the aristocrats in Parliament. Now, the idea was that the gunpowder would blow up, it would kill the king, kill the aristocrats, and allow commoners like Guy Fawkes to run the country. Now, there's a whole lot of reasons why Guy Fawkes was not a big fan of James I, but the bottom line was the plan didn't work. And Guy Fawkes and his band of revolutionaries are going to be captured and eventually killed. Now, this is why on November the 6th every year, people from Great Britain are going to light bonfires and shoot off fireworks in honor of the Gunpowder Revolution. Now, James I, when he came to England, is going to call for a unification. Now, it's important to write in your notes that not everybody agreed with this. There were those who felt that England was being shortchanged by giving too much billing to Scotland. There are those who believed that bringing Ireland into the British Empire would be a mess. Now, James I was brought in with one major condition. James I could not promote his Catholic faith. Now, James I lived in a Catholic country, but had been raised a Protestant like Elizabeth, to show the English that he was one of them. James I is going to call for the printing of the King James Version Bible. Now, the idea was that the Bible would be printed up and the Bible would be sent to all churches throughout Great Britain. Now, the King James Version is just a shade different than the Catholic Version, particularly in some of the wording. It still has the same, everything still goes in both Bibles, but the King James Version has just slightly different wording. It would be a little bit harder for us to read today, and Most Protestant churches today still use the King James Version. Now, James is going to die, and he is going to be succeeded by his son, Charles I. Now, Charles I became king. He did not share his father's approach to the Church of England. Charles I believed that the Protestants in England were misguided and called for the church to adopt what he called Catholic ways. The use of symbols, the use of prayers, the use of gestures in its service. Charles was opposed in Parliament. When Elizabeth I died, Parliament had gained power. Now, Elizabeth had used Parliament as a rubber stamp to carry out her wishes, but now Parliament believed that it could use the Stuarts as a rubber stamp for their ideas. Charles I was not wanting to give away power to Parliament. Charles I had called for English troops to aid Catholic troops abroad. Charles had called for the Church of Scotland, a Protestant church, to be disbanded and to be replaced by the Catholic faith. To do this, Charles needed Parliament's approval and needed money. Parliament said no. Now, when Charles heard this, he saw this as a treasonous act and ordered 5 members of Parliament to be arrested and charged with treason. Now, Charles I is going to lead troops into the House of Commons, and there he's going to call for the arrest and torture of these 5 members. One of them, Oliver Cromwell, was in attendance when the king came in. And Oliver Cromwell is basically going to say to the king, "You do not have the authority. If you think you do, then we, the rest of the commoners, are going to show you that you do not." Now, this here is from the movie Cromwell. It is a pretty accurate representation of Cromwell and Charles I and their discussions as to who is right and who is wrong. In the end, the king is going to give in, and Parliament's power is going to increase, but that's only temporarily. Parliament and most English citizens wanted to decide that if you supported the king, you would be called a loyalist or a cavalier. For those who supported Parliament, they were called Puritans because they wished to purify the Church of England from its popish ways. They were also called Roundheads because of the style of haircuts they had. Now, quite a few Englishmen saw themselves as loyalists. Quite a few Englishmen saw themselves as Puritans. But quite a few Englishmen did not take any side. And then there were always the Pilgrims. The Pilgrims were those who believed that both the Puritans and the Catholics were wrong, and they needed to get out of England while the getting was still good. These are the people who will eventually form Plymouth in the English colonies. Now, the Puritans were led by this man here, Oliver Cromwell. And Cromwell is going to create a large fighting force, and he's going to force Charles into Scotland. Now, Cromwell and Parliament were willing to allow King Charles II to rule in absentia. In other words, Charles would be safe in Scotland, and he would rule, and the English would pretty much decide what they were going to listen to and what they weren't going to listen to. Well, eventually Charles and his army is going to return to England in 1648, and a series of battles are going to be fought. Now, Charles and the Cavalier army will eventually be defeated at Naseby. Now, Naseby is going to be the site of a great battle between Puritans and Cavaliers. And in this battle, Charles himself is going to be captured, and he is going to be charged with treason. This, again, is from the movie Cromwell. And in it, it kind of outlines the battle plan of both the Cavaliers and the Puritans. Now, it's important on a map like this to find the Battle of Naseby. Now, to help you out, 3 letters have been placed on the map. L for London, the capital of England, E for Edinburgh, the capital of Scotland, and D for Dublin, the capital of Ireland. Now remember, these 4 land masses here make up the Great Britain: England, Scotland, Wales, and Ireland. Now the 3 X's represent the sites of the greatest battles in English history. Now we have already looked at this one right here. This is the Battle of Hastings, where in 1159 William the Norman, or William the Conqueror, is going to defeat the forces loyal to Alfred of Saxon. Here is the Battle of Naseby. Naseby is real close to the city of Manchester, and it is this place here where Charles I and his Cavalier army is going to be defeated. Now, we will get to this X later on this week. Now, it's important that you get this map off of your Google Classroom as well. One of the Battle of Naseby is going to be asked for in the walkout worksheet today. Parliament ordered the execution of Charles I in 1649. Now, when Charles was executed, Cromwell is declared leader of England, Scotland, Wales, and Ireland, Great Britain. He will be given the title Lord High Executioner, and Cromwell, and later his son, will rule until 1660. And this is when the Stuarts will be invited back to the throne. Now, this video here deals with the execution of Charles I. It is from the movie Cromwell. Well, I think this would probably be a pretty good place for us to stop. Tomorrow we'll look at Charles II, who followed his grandfather to the throne, and some of the problems he had along with his son, James I. And we'll also talk about the Glorious Revolution tomorrow.